Madame Meirav Eilon Shahar, permanent representative of Israel to the UN, Mr. Rémi Burry, député au Grand Conseil genevois, Dr. Jacques Gauthier, his wife Rani, and his daughter Adriella, Dr. Grégory Lafitte, Mr. Eilon, Executive Director of UN Watch, Mr. Michael Ben-Admon, Rabbi of the Jewish Community of Geneva. Mr. Bernardson is unfortunately ill. He can come tonight. Mr. Laurent Favre, President of the Esther Foundation, Mr. Joël Herzog, President of the Geneva section of Swiss-Israeli Association. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, on behalf of the organizing committee, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this conference entitled The Centennial of the Mandate for Palestine, its ongoing materiality in international law. Before introducing the speakers, I think it is important to introduce our association, which is not well known to most. But before that, we want to mark a time of silence for the 19 victims of this morning attacks in Jerusalem, and especially for the young Aryeh Shulpik, who died. He was only 16 years old. We will make a time of silence. We solemnly stand with the families and pray for their consolation. My name is Richard Pittet, and I am the co-founder and president of Gesher Ha'haim. Gesher Ha'haim means Bridge of Lives in Hebrew, and the association was born in 2019. It is a concrete expression of all its members working to raise awareness of anti-Semitism issues. It organizes events, conferences, and especially the so-called March of Life events. Anti-Semitism is changing its face, although its underlying nature remains the same. As an association, we are alarmed by the new vector that find in what is called anti-Zionism, the justification for the hatred of Jews and this hope to murder, as we have been able to observe these last years. We could ask the question, how does the Centennial of Mandate for Palestine fit in with raising awareness of anti-Semitism? We have to admit that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has become a major vector of hatred of Israel and Jews. The prism of reading manufactured by political activism and the media impose a narrative that makes Israel a colonial invader, no apartheid, and other very extreme caliphate that do not need to be named here. On both sides, the debate is very emotional, even passionate. The narrative that accuses Israel is encoded in a certain reading of the history of the Middle East, going so far as to delegitimize, for the most extreme, the very existence of the State of Israel. This is why we wanted to organize a conference that could take us out of the passionate debates and take up the process of the creation of the State of Israel from a purely legal point of view in order to remind us of essential elements that deprives certain current accusation of any foundation. In this respect, the Centennial of the Mandate of Palestine was ideal. This is for several reasons. Firstly, because this is a legal act that founded the Jewish national home and its validity, as well shall see, is permanent. Secondly, because important Genevan personalities were linked to the history of the mandate, I want to name Mr. William Rappard and Chaim Weizmann. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome the presence of 6 of Mr. William Rappard's descendants who have done us the honor of being present this evening. And thirdly, because the history of the drafting of the mandate, also signed in London on July 24, 1922, is anecdotally linked to Geneva, and particularly to this hotel. We hope that through this conference you will be able to broaden your reading of the event in the Middle East and participate in a more peaceful world, which was the original intention of the men who drafted the Middle East mandates. We will now hear from Dr. Grégory Lafitte. Dr. Grégory Théophile Lafitte is the Director of United Nations Affairs of European Coalition for Israel and co-founder of the Forum for Cultural Diplomacy. One of the outcomes of his work is the identification of the blueprint of anti-Semitism. He is one of the initiators of recognition of Yom Kippur at the United Nations and of the group of Friends of the Jewish Culture at UN in New York, which aims at fighting anti-Semitism by highlighting the contribution of the Jewish culture to humanity as a whole and to all the nations around the world. Please welcome Dr. Lafitte.
Saltiel sentit que le moment de vaincre était arrivé. « Excellence, dit-il, à l'époque où Genève n'était qu'un marais putride, reprit Saltiel, au bord duquel s'élevaient quelques huttes autour desquelles des hommes, hélas nus, attrapaient du gibier avec leurs dents, une ville superbe s'étendait en Orient, majestueuse et couronnée, et peuplée d'une multitude d'enfants de Dieu qui agitaient des palmes et lisaient les commandements que Dieu a envoyés à l'homme pour qu'il devienne homme. Cette ville, continua Saltiel, avait nom Jérusalem, capitale du royaume d'Israël. Bref, Excellence, cette nation est à la veille d'être constituée. Elle m'a fait l'honneur de me nommer son cicérone, et cet honneur, je le reporte tout entier sur moi-même. Saltiel felt that the moment of victory had arrived. Your Excellency, he said, back when Geneva was no more than a putrid swamp, Saltiel continued, with a few huts rising at its borders, around which men ran naked, alas, catching game with their teeth. A superb city rose from the Orient, majestic and crowned, and peopled by myriad children of God, who waved palm fronds in the air and read the commandments of God that God has sent down to man so that he may truly become human. This city, continued Saltiel, was named Jerusalem, capital of the kingdom of Israel. In short, Your Excellency, this nation is about to be reconstituted. She has honored me by naming me her tourist guide, and this honor I bear entirely myself. Your Excellencies, dear Ambassador Eilon Shahar, dear Dr. Gauthier, dear Mr. Bury, dear Rabbi Ben-Admon, dear Mr. Herzog, dear Mr. Saltiel, dear Mr. Neuer, dear Monsieur Pittet, dear Monsieur Favre, cher Laurent, honorable guests, dear friends, I just read an excerpt excerpt of Manche Clou, or Nail Cruncher in English. The second part of La Geste des Juifs, The Tale of the Jews of Albert Cohen. Why did I read this text? Cohen's novel describes the nerve, the chutzpah, of a colorful handful of Jews whom Albert Cohen calls les valeureux, the valiant ones, who send a letter to the Deputy Secretary General of the League of Nations and go meet with him to ask for a Jewish state in Palestine. When I was asked to speak at this event at Hôtel Beau Rivage, from which a similar letter by Lord Balfour was sent, I naturally thought of Solal, of Saltiel, of Pinchas, known as Manche Clou, Mattathias, Michael, and Salomon, the five valeureux. It also made me think of five other valiant ones: Chaim Weizmann, Nachum Sokolov, Menachem Ushishkin, André Speer, and Sylvain Lévy. The Zionist delegates who presented their claims in February 1919 to the Supreme Council of the Allied Powers. They had the same chutzpah. You will hear a lot more about all of this, I'm sure, I hope, I'm pretty sure, in the presentation of my friend, Dr. Jacques Gauthier. But it also made me think of Albert Cohen himself, who is not only this Ottoman-born, naturalized Swiss citizen of Geneva, the French language prominent writer that I hope we all know, whose combined lyricism and extraordinary narrative invention is unsurpassed in my opinion, and whose work gives a unique and powerful reflection on Jewishness and Judaism. But he was also the representative of the Jewish Agency for Palestine. He was a friend of André Speer, who was in San Remo, who was part of the five valiant ones. Special envoy of Chaim Weizmann, whom he actually met on the boat bringing Weizmann and the other valiant ones to Italy for the San Remo 1920 conference. These exceptional men fought day and night to make their dream a reality. They were not lawyers, politicians, or even journalists. Not one of them. They were intellectuals, scientists, writers, poets, like Theodor Herzog, the father of modern Zionism. They were the true valiant ones, the true valeureux, who knew that if you will it, it is no dream. And these are the words with which I want to leave you. If you will it, it is not just a dream. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lafitte, for this very good introduction. We are privileged to have with us His Excellency Meirav and Shahar, who will now take the floor. And she is the permanent representative of Israel to the United States Nations and international organizations in Geneva. After earning a dual degree in political science and cinema and communication from Tel Aviv University, she completed her master in public policy administration. Joining the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1995, Meirav and Shahar has represented Israel in a number of different capacities. As Deputy Director, General, Ambassador, Consul, Deputy, Head of Mission, she represented her country in Vietnam, New York, Los Angeles, and Kenya, among others, and since August 2020, here in Geneva. Excellency, please welcome.
Thank you, everyone, and good evening. It's really a pleasure to be here. First of all, let me say that my thoughts and prayers are with the victims and their families of the horrific terrorist attack which took place today in Jerusalem this morning. Actually, 2 attacks in parallel. In particular, my thoughts are with the family of the 16-year-old Aryeh Shupik, who sadly died. It is heartbreaking, and I have no words. Really, may his memory be a blessing. Dr. Jacques Gauthier, Richard Pittet, Dr. Grégory Lafitte, friends, colleagues. 100 years ago, a historic agreement was approved by the League of Nations that marked the world's embrace of the connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. The international community, through the League of Nations, recognized a fundamental truth. The land of Israel is the ancestral home of the Jewish people. The mandate clearly recognized in its preamble paragraphs the historical connection of the Jewish with mandatory Palestine and supported the establishment of a national homeland for the Jewish people, including by facilitating Jewish immigration to the region. People tend to forget it, but even facilitating this. By the way, my father was one of them. My father immigrated from Poland with his family on certificates to Palestine, mandatory Palestine at the time. It was in 1933, legally immigrated. This included calling on the mandatory to put into effect the Balfour Declaration, a historical declaration made by the British government just a few years earlier. Yet, we live in a day and age of historical revisionism and ambivalence. Today, some lack the knowledge of the legal origin of the establishment of the State of Israel, and others seek to find its creation illegal through international courts and mechanisms such as the International Court of Justice. Let me be clear, these efforts are not only designed to attack Israel, but to delegitimize its very existence. That is why the historical and legal facts around the State of Israel's establishment need to be retold and retold. And this is the importance of today's event, and thank you for that. Today we see those who deny Zionism. We see those who call the Jewish people colonialists on the land of their ancestors. Yet, the self-determination of the Jewish people and their connection to their homeland in Israel has been recognized by the international community and international law. Those who try to redefine Zionism as a form of racism are simply denying this fact. Zionism is not and should not be considered in a negative form. President Herzog said at the event marking 125th anniversary of the first Zionist Congress in Basel earlier this year, and I quote, "Zionism is an expression of our own national identity, traditions, hope, pride, enlightenment, values, and justice." End of quote. For me, this is what this mandate and the Balfour Agreement represent. They represent the world's support for the Zionist movement and for the Jewish people's right to live in safety and security in their ancestral home. If this support had been enacted quicker, earlier, if the world has acted sooner in giving the Jewish people this right, perhaps history as we know it would have been very different. As we witness the rise of anti-Semitism once again throughout the world, and on social media, the Jewish people once again feel danger. However, this time it is very different. Why? Because the Jewish people have a safe haven, a homeland, the State of Israel. This document represented the first time the international community recognized this, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about the history and the relevance of this agreement from Dr. Jacques Gauthier today. I would like to thank Gesher Ha'haim very much, and Richard, you specifically, for organizing this event. It's very important for me and for all of us. So thank you very much.
Yeah, this is an honor to commit to this topic. And yeah, as I said to Ifat Reshef Sunday, vous pouvez compter sur notre support inconditionnel. So thank you, Excellency. And before listening to our keynote speaker, we will listen to a musical interlude performed by Paul Hess and Natacha Catusse. Natacha Catusse is a concertist, violinist, and teacher living in Pays Jacques. Her love for Israel and the Jewish people led her to join Gesher Ha'haim in order to make the accent of Jewish music resonate. Paul Hess is an enjoying international career as a conductor, and he is the co-founder of the Opera Academy, which transmits the love of opera singing and the pleasure of the stage to children. So please welcoming them. They interpreted Pugnani-Kreisler for violin and piano. We will now listen our keynote speaker, Dr. Jacques Gauthier, and his biography is very impressive. And here is just an extract. Dr. Jacques Gauthier is a Canadian international lawyer and scholar. Please, can you shut down your smartphones? Thank you. He received his PhD from the University of Geneva with a dissertation entitled Sovereignty over the Old City of Jerusalem. Dr. Gauthier's international practice has focused on numerous human rights issues. He is the founder of the Toronto law firm Gauthier and Associates, which was established in 1984. He has served as a legal counsel to different governments, including the government of France, Spain, Mexico, and Canada. In 2000, he was knighted by the President of France as a Chevalier de l'Ordre du Mérite. And in 2015, he was again knighted by the President of the Republic of France, and he was appointed Chevalier de la Légion d'honneur. He received the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation 2020 Advocate Awards of Excellence. Dr. Gauthier is listed by the Allgemeiner newspaper of New York as one of the top 100 individuals who have positively influenced Jewish life in 2019. Dr. Gauthier has presented his finding of the sovereignty of the city of Jerusalem and disputed territories in many international centers, including London, House of Commons and House of Lords, Washington, US Congress, Rome, Italian Senate, New York, United Nations, Brussels, European Union Parliament, Tokyo, Japanese Parliament, Ottawa, Canadian House of Commons, and The Hague, Dutch Parliament. His work has also been presented in conferences in Jerusalem, Basel, Geneva, San Remo, and Toronto, and today here in Hotel Beau Rivage. Dr. Gauthier, please take the floor. Juste un mot. Je t'installe.
Merci Richard. J'ai des choses importantes à dire. There's so much I want to say tonight. I want to make sure you hear me. Ambassador, Your Excellency, Ambassador Shahar, Monsieur Joël Herzog, Richard Pittet, you have worked so hard. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. You have done so much. Dr. Lafitte, Dr. Nathalie Steiner, Dr. Jean-François Collet, Laurent Fabre, and the many others who have come, but also my wife, Ronnie. My journey has been a lengthy one. I think it was many decades ago that we moved to Geneva so that I could pursue PhD studies. And then these wonderful daughters followed, and one is with us tonight, and she's my right arm, and I thank Adriella for everything that she does. J'aime beaucoup Genève. C'est une relation profonde. We've been linked to Geneva for decades, as I mentioned a moment ago, and I truly love this city. Not only we were students decades ago, but 3 of our 4 daughters were students at the same institute, the Graduate Institute of International Studies. One completed a PhD, so for that reason we were here frequently. And it's a city which has numerous links to Israel, to the founders of the state of Israel, I think, for instance, of Herzog and the first Zionist conference, which I'm going to talk about, not too far away from Geneva. I think of Wiseman. He was a student at the University of Geneva, where I got my PhD. He met his wife there. Good things happen in Geneva. And then, a little later, I'm going to tell you about someone very special, William Rappard. And many of you have heard that name already tonight. You've heard that some of his relatives are here. Who is William Rappard? Why have we not heard about him before? Well, tonight, I'm going to say, nota bene. Note well how significant he is. So, here's my challenge. I'm here to stand to defend the rights of the Jewish people and the state of Israel that have been granted, that have been bestowed already. Issues relating to the status of the land referred to as Palestine came up at crucial times of history, and as a result, decisions were made, which I now can say, as a result, it's res judicata, chose jugée. The decisions that we're debating today disregard the fact that the issues have been dealt with and addressed. The problem is this: when you interact with the nations as I do, there's so many false narratives floating around, so many concocted stories that are received and believed all over the place, because in law, what counts in order to make a decision are the facts. If you don't know the facts, you get to the wrong decision. And because there are so many relevant facts, it's easy to get it wrong. So my task tonight is to try to zero in, to distill, faire un triage of the most salient, significant facts, which undergird, which are foundations to the sovereignty entitlements of the Jewish people and the state of Israel to Jerusalem and every component of the disputed territories. I'm an international lawyer, involved in human rights causes for a long time. Decades ago, I set up an organization called Justice for Children, fought on those battlefields. Then I was so worried about the way Chinese people were treated that I led a delegation to Beijing as acting chair of Canada's #1 human rights organization to deal about violation of rights in China, which are so abundant. And then I bumped into the question of the status of Jerusalem and the rights of the Jewish people. And that has been my primary pursuit and cause, and tonight you'll understand why. So what you see is that the nations have bought the false narrative that Jews in Jerusalem are thieves, they're usurpers, they're trespassers. They don't have the right to be in parts of Jerusalem, don't have the rights to be in segments of Judea and Samaria. But these allegations are legal allegations. If I own something and I take it, I'm not a thief. They have neglected, disregarded, or purposely ignored the events that gave the rights to the Jews. So come with me. I want to take you and try to connect these dots between the most crucial events, which I submit to you are solid foundations in international law. See, many of the people I interact with around the world are people of faith. Some are Christians, some are Jews, and they believe that that land has been promised to the Jews by the Almighty. I'm not here to tell you anything contrary to that. But I'm here to tell you about the rights in international law because regrettably, in the places of power of the world, whether it's New York or Geneva or Brussels, where I spent several days, I made a presentation in front of the European Parliament 4 days ago. The language you speak, regrettably, has not much to do with Bible and spiritual traditions of Jews or Christians. It's international law and politics. So let us look at the underpinnings of the rights I argue, I claim, have been given to the Jewish people. Let's start with the Balfour Declaration. There are many components of what I'm going to present you're not going to be as familiar with, but that's well known. So what happened is that in 1917, the British War Cabinet deliberated. They wanted to deal with a question, an issue. It had to do with the rights of the Jewish people who had been persecuted, mistreated, expelled, massacred for centuries. And all of a sudden, there was an hour of justice, an hour of reparation, where people of conscience, and there are people of conscience all over the world today, there are people of conscience in this room, suddenly decided around the table where the War Cabinet was meeting that it was time to make a decision. What's important about that decision is that it was embracing and endorsing a policy regarding the establishment of the national home for the Jews in Palestine. However, in 1917, the British did not have possession of that part of the world. I can show you the map of Palestine in 1917. It was part of the Ottoman territories. It wasn't called Palestine. But why did the British refer to it as Palestine? Because in a Christian nation like Britain, the Holy Land was connected to Palestine. And it was connected to the Jews. Now, you need to understand in any legal dispute, any legal matter, what the intentions of the parties are. What's the claim? And who are the parties? The claim, the underpinning of the claim of the Jewish people, I go back to 1896, the pamphlet of Herzog, describing the central aim of the Zionism movement from his perspective. The subtitle of his book, The Jewish State, or his pamphlet, is An Attempt at a Modern Solution to the Jewish Question. The Jewish question. The Jewish problem. The Jewish question, the Jewish problem, is not the problem of the Jews. It's the problem of the nations back then and today. We have a problem in the way we deal with the Jewish people around the world. And he thought a way to deal with the problem is to be a good Jew wherever one lived. And he was doing quite well until he witnessed l'affaire Dreyfus in Paris. And he saw intense anti-Semitism. He saw hatred. And he said to himself, how can this be? What have we done to deserve this? Bottom line, he decided, none of this. There's one solution. A Jewish state. So he organized a conference in Switzerland, not far from here. Basel, August 29, 31, 1897. And he did something miraculous. He managed to get Jews to agree about something. United Jews. You know the old saying, if there are 5 Jews in one room, then there are 10 solutions coming out of the discussions. He got 200, and they agreed to support his vision, his plan, his solution, which is to create for the Jewish people a legally assured home in Palestine, basically to pursue the vision of a Jewish state. And then there were details as to how to accomplish that. Now, there were other events in those days that I'll just make quick reference to because we want to be thorough. In 1915, there were letters written between Sharif Hussein and Sir Henry McMahon. They're relevant in some way. They're not material legally. Because these were secret letters. No one knew about those letters. Everybody knew about the Balfour Declaration. It's a declaration of November 2, 1917. It was published in newspapers in England a few days later. These letters were not published, were secret, and yet, in my view, they're still relevant from a political perspective because the British, in essence, committed to supporting the nationalism movements of the Arabs to, if they were victorious in the war against the Turks, to establish some independent Arab states. That was a commitment which I felt the British found that it was necessary, and these pledges were considered binding, and yet nobody knew about them. But they were relevant later. What I want to point out is the involvement of Emir Hussein. He is the head of the Hashemites, one tribe, powerful tribe. He's based in Mecca, and he's got an army, and they play a role during the war. And we'll see in Paris how significant they are. Also in those days, 1916, a secret agreement between the French, the Russians, and the British. They anticipate victory, which is difficult to do because things weren't going particularly well in 1916. But if we win, here's how we're going to cut up the pie. You're going to get this, we're going to get this. But totally secret. And it was only, in fact, disclosed after the Russian Revolution when these documents came to the surface, and all the others involved in the Middle East were furious at the French and English for trying to divide up these territories. So it was letters or agreements. The British were led by Edward Grey, and I'll skip the next important event. The Rapallo Conference. Why would I include this as one of the key events? There's a beautiful hotel. It's still there. And in that beautiful town, not too far away from San Remo in Italy, the leading powers of the day, France, Great Britain, and Italy, got together. Things were not going well, particularly after the defeat of the Italian army, and the Turks were very successful in some battles, and there's realization that they had to get their act together. They had to coordinate things better. So this is when the Supreme War Council was created. In my legal analysis, it's one of the things I want you to remember. So lots of information going to be mentioned to you, but please remember the Supreme Council. You'll see why. Trust me. So this council is really chaired by the British, but it was initially Britain, France, and Italy, and then the United States joined, and Japan. Very material, legally, from the perspectives of the conveyance of rights in international law. I'll show you where. Paris Peace Conference. Huge moment in terms of what is relevant historically. Why? Because this is where, at the Quai d'Orsay, the victorious nations meet and talk and deliberate for 6 months. So important for different reasons. The British conquered Palestine by September 18, 1918. There was an armistice agreement signed October 30, 1918. There was British military administration from July until July 1, 1920, and then a civil administration until the Treaty of Lausanne was signed. So here's the thing. The British defeat the Turks. They occupy the lands of the Turks. And occupation continues until there's a peace treaty. Do you think that when the Turks presented their positions in front of the Allies in Paris, that the victorious Allies were open to simply saying, okay, you made a mistake, we'll give you back your lands? That's not what happens. Prior centuries, if you fought another nation and you prevailed, guess what you did? You not only took control, but you annexed and established sovereignty over their territories. Think of Portugal in the past. Think of France. Think of Britain, of course, the British Empire. That's what you did in the old days. But there's no way that the Turks were going to get those lands back. In the meantime, all those years, it's occupation until there's a peace treaty. To the extent that there's any occupation in the land of Israel or in the disputed territories right now, occupation is not a particularly objectionable term. It's what happens in international law. When you don't have sovereignty, you have that, occupation. It's not a gros mot in French. It's nothing nasty. So right now we have occupation there, but the world has an interesting approach when it comes to Israel. You're attacked in 1948, 1949. You're attacked in 1967, in 1973. And then there are resolutions that come out, having been attacked and having been able to gain control over the lands of those who were the aggressors, the hostile ones. And all of a sudden, there's a new proposition never presented before in the world. You, Israel, must give back that land to those who attacked you. I'm telling you, as an historian, as a jurist, as an expert in these matters, it's unheard of. But there's a standard for the Jews. There's a standard for Israel. And there's a standard for the rest of the world. So, Paris, that Supreme Council I told you about was important. In Paris, it was supposed to be a group of 10, the head of each state plus the foreign minister. It shrunk to a group of 4. So the 4 key individuals in Paris were Lord George Orlando, George Clemenceau of France, and President Wilson. Played a very key role. Wilson, as I walked down the quay, in front of the Palais, Wilson, there's a sign, and he's referred to as the founder of the League of Nations. He deserves a lot of praise. I'll tell you why. So, imagine a court battle. We're dealing with competing territorial claims to Ottoman territories. And there's a moment in Paris during that conference where the Arabs are the parties. Please remember this. The parties are Arabs and Jews. And the leader of the Arabs is Faisal. He's the son of Hussein. It's the Hashemites leading the Arabs and presenting their cause. And the leader for the Zionists is Chaim Weizmann. However, before they make their presentations, they get together in Paris. On January 3, 1919, they discuss their respective aspirations, desiderata. They actually sit down and say, what are you going to be asking for? And they compare notes. Having done that, they sit down and sign an agreement. Without going into the details, the bottom line is that Faisal says to the Jewish representative, we're going to support your national movement if you support ours. We're talking about it. He wanted, in his vision, there wasn't going to be a bunch of Arab states. There was going to be one. And he said, help us to get our Arab state out of Ottoman territories, and we'll help you get your Palestine. Read the agreement. They want to help each other. He acknowledges the policy of the Balfour Declaration in all of its aspects and says, we're going to help you fulfill that policy. The Arab leader. Now, February 6th, Faisal leads the Arab delegation. He appears in front of the 5 Supreme Council members. You'll note that Wilson is there. You'll note that Lloyd George is there. All the key leaders are there, and they present their claim. See, in Canada, when I'm in court in front of a judge, what we present is called a statement of claim. We present our asks, our demands, our claims. That document is not legally binding on anybody. It only becomes a source of rights and obligations if the judges recognize and agree and accept your claim. The Arabs are asking to be a party, to be recognized as a people, as a party in the proceedings. And they want independence for the Arabs in huge chunks of the Ottoman territories. But please note as well that in regard to Palestine, they don't in any way object to the position presented by the Zionists in Paris. In fact, Faisal states, as far as Palestine is concerned, will exclude it, will not include it in the areas that we want for an Arab state. Were you aware of that? In the crucial moments when the claims are presented in Paris, that's what the leader of the Arab world in those days says. Palestine's not for us. Now, you'll note that the next presentation, just a few days later, on February 27, is the opportunity for the Zionist delegation to present its claim. And I want to emphasize, I want to stress, any analysis, any study of the rights that have resulted from these events requires a good look at what the Jews were asking for. Because when you look at what they're asking for, then we're going to look at, was it accepted? Was it recognized? Did they get what they were looking for? Well, they were asking for the recognition of the historic title of the Jewish people to Palestine. Let me explain that. The historic title and connection was there before their presentation. You know what I did? I decided to write a thesis at the Graduate Institute on the status of Jerusalem in law, in international law, making it necessary to study the links between the Jewish people and Jerusalem. This one weighs 10 pounds. If you have 2 of those, it's really good in the morning for exercise. If I'd known what I was getting into, c'est la mer à boire. So deep, so wide. I needed 3 of these, Madam Ambassador, to summarize the links between the Jewish people and Jerusalem and the Holy Land. So, they want recognition of those rights. The rights are there, but they want the world to acknowledge that these rights have been there. So, they're asking for recognition of that historic title based on the connection, and they want something else. Look at this. They're asking the nations for the right to reconstitute what they used to have. Come on. If ever that was accepted and recognized, one would have to look at what used to be there. Because if the answer is yes, you can do that, then they reconstitute what they used to have. And then they present borders. They want a mandate system. They want a trustee over the mandated territories because they're not ready to become yet a sovereign nation, because there were fewer Jews, there were Arabs there, and they wanted a trust that would protect them. So here's the territory they're asking for. Look at this carefully. Land on both the east side and the west side of the Jordan River. They're asking for this. We're going to see what happens. What was the response of the powers? Were they prepared to go as far as this for the Jewish national home? You know, interestingly, I found so many documents in my research. I keep researching. I never stop. And this one I found more recently. This is a document prepared for President Wilson for the Paris Peace Conference. The American delegation heading for Paris takes the position as far as Palestine, as far as the Jews are concerned, which was a huge question during the Paris Peace Conference. We think, we Americans, that there should be a separate state of Palestine, and that the Jews should be invited to return there. And then when they're ready, they should recognize Palestine as a Jewish state as soon as it is a Jewish state, in fact, meaning when the immigration has been sued. That was the position of the British. That was the position of the French. The covenant of the League of Nations. Need to talk about the covenant because it has one of the pierres angulaires, one of the cornerstones of what I want to talk about. So the draft adopted in April of 1919, then part of the Treaty of Versailles in June of 1919, became effective January 10, 1920. And the first meeting of the Council was in fact in Paris in January of 1920, and the first session of the Assembly, November 15, December 18, 1920, in Geneva. And we're going to talk about the reason we're in the Beau Rivage today is because of this assembly, first assembly. Article 22 of the Covenant of the League of Nations. You can't skip. This is a necessary stop in our analysis because something absolutely unprecedented is done by the principal powers. They introduce an article whereby instead of just taking over the states that they've conquered, they're going to set up a trust system, a mandate system, and it's going to be for the well-being and development of the peoples who are there, or in the case of Palestine, for the Jewish people. I humbly submit that that principle, that sacred trust, is still relevant today in regard to any portion of the lands that were covered by the mandate for Palestine that have not yet been finally disposed of. You'll see why. Remember I told you the principal powers were important? Look at this. At the Treaty of Versailles, when the Germans are losing vast territories as well, who gets title? Why is this important? If you're a lawyer and somebody comes to you and they want to buy a house, I said, well, you better check to see if the vendor's got good title, because if he doesn't have good title or she doesn't have good title, you're not going to get to a good title. So in my analysis, in my research, I have to ascertain who gave title to the Jewish people. Did they have title? You see here, as far as German territories, that was the case. If I look for a moment at the treaty relating to Hungary, you see this 5 nations again that I tell you about, the Supreme Council, and they, Hungarians, renounce in favor of those powers all rights entitled to certain territories. Then these powers can do what they want. Now I take you to the San Remo Conference. You want to talk about a defining moment in history for the Jewish people, for Israel, for the Arabs. It's in San Remo that the leaders that I talked about before, remember they heard the submissions of the Zionist delegation and of the Arabs. In Paris for 6 months, they heard many, many submissions, made decisions, there were treaties, but as far as the Turkish territories were concerned, they weren't ready. They said, we're going to reconvene later, and they chose this beautiful villa in San Remo, Villa de Vachon. I've had the privilege of being there many times my good friend Dr. Lafitte has been there also many times. That's the way it looks today. It's now a luxury condo building, and I'm hoping that somehow someone will soon decide to buy a nice big apartment there, and we can have celebrations of the significance of Saint Remo in that villa. We've been plotting and planning something like that. So, who's there? Here's your Supreme Council. Lord George, you know, they're heroes, and they're valiant ones that you were referring to, Grégory. He was a valiant one. He was a dedicated supporter of the Jewish people. He was a Christian, developed a lot of respect and close ties with Weizmann and others. He plays a huge role here. So, this is one of my nota bene moments. Please, if there's a moment you have to pay attention and make a note, look what happens. He has a discussion with particularly the French leader, Meirav, the president, and they're talking about Palestine. They're saying, all right, they want to establish their country, their state in Palestine. So the French guy says, what is Palestine? What are we talking about? And basically, the answer given by Lord George is that, well, we should give them from Dan to Beersheba. And the response of the French guy is, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? So, Lord George, and I have the minutes, the full minutes, detailed minutes, says, okay, I'll tell you what I mean. He pulls out a map. He says, this is a map in the book of George Adam Smith. It's map 34. And I have a copy of the original book at home. Map 34. Look at it. It's kingdoms of David and Solomon. Lands on both sides of the Jordan River. Looks amazingly similar to the area covered by the map presented by the Zionist organization in Paris. And bottom line, they decide, okay, that's what we're going to do. We're going to choose that as the area, and the decision is made, and this is the resolution that is adopted. And what I call this the fertilization of the Balfour Declaration. Remember when I told you that the Balfour Declaration was very supportive from a political movement? It was so helpful to the Zionist movement, but it wasn't a source of rights and obligations. Here, the ones with the power of disposition in law adopt the Declaration. So it's fertilized. It comes to life in international law. It is truly a defining moment. I want to stress the words of the Foreign Secretary Curzon. In those discussions in Saint Remo, he also points out that the beneficiaries of the trust in respect to Palestine are not the Jewish inhabitants of that area alone. They're Jews worldwide. And you study the documents for Iraq, you study the documents for Syria and Lebanon, it's only for the inhabitants. But this is for, they're virtually deemed. They're deemed to be inhabitants, even though they're not there. So maybe 14 million Jews are beneficiaries in those days. Okay, so San Remo Conference, we move to the next important things. But before, maybe some of you might say, Jacques, Dr. Gauthier, are you not exaggerating a little bit the importance of this event? Well, listen to the words of Chaim Weizmann. That recognition of our rights in Palestine is embodied in the treaty with Turkey and has become part of international law. This is the most important political event in the whole history of our movement, and perhaps no exaggeration to say in the whole history of our people since the exile. He was there. He understood the ramifications. The Treaty of Sèvres is a treaty that was signed immediately after with the Turks. And it codifies, it incorporates all the key aspects of the decisions in San Remo. If you want a confirmation in law, this is a treaty with the Turks. And in this treaty, you'll see in Article 132, what do? They give title to those territories, including Palestine, to the principal powers we've talked about. And the Balfour Declaration, which is the core of the decision in San Remo, is repeated in Article 95. After that, the French and the British discussed the boundaries since the British are going to be in charge of Palestine and Iraq, the French are going to be in charge of Syria and Lebanon. Where are the borders? They enter into an agreement. Now the mandate for Palestine. Here we are. So for more than 4 weeks, the nations gather in Geneva in late 1920. It is the first assembly of the League of Nations, la Société des Nations. And it's interesting because they were numerous. There were many delegations. The British took over one hotel, the Beau Rivage. The British were here and played a very key role with regard to the mandate for Palestine while they were here. The French took over l'Hôtel des Bergues, and other nations did similarly. Look at this. While they're here, on December the 6th, Balfour, who's the head of the delegation, sends a letter to the Secretary General of the League of Nations. Excuse me. And what does he do? He sends a draft of the mandate for Palestine. This is the document we're talking about. This is the event we're celebrating. But in the year 1920, the documentation has a shape. And you'll see the signature. The letterhead includes Beau Rivage. This place. And here's a a component of the preamble of the mandate. Look at article of the preamble, which says that, thank you, Article 132 of the Treaty of Peace. Merci, Richard. Signed at Sèvres, is the document where Turkey renounces, in favor of the principal Allied powers, all rights and title over Palestine. Black and white, clear? Do we know who gave title in respect to Palestine? The principal powers. Where did they get the title? From the Turks. And the principle, which was referred to by the ambassador, that the historical connection between the Jewish people with Palestine is recognized, and the grounds for reconstituting their national home in the country. It's no longer a claim, a political request, something asked for by the Zionists. It's granted. It's in the document if the document is approved. Article 2 is the most significant article. It's the disposition clause, whereby the mandatory commits to establishing a Jewish national home in Palestine. And I'll flag Article 25. Look at Article 25. I'll just say this: whatever is there is replaced by something else, with huge negative consequences for Israel and the Jewish people. So similarly, while they're here in Geneva, Jean Gou, who's a political leader for France at the UN, sends the draft of the mandate for Syria and Lebanon. And in that document, the same clause appears. The fact that title to those territories have come from the Turks to the principal powers, enabling the powers to turn around and give to the Arabs, the inhabitants, title. Same for Mesopotamia. So let's move ahead. In May of 1922, there's a meeting in Geneva, and I want to highlight the fact that the members of the council, there are 8 of them, one of the key ones is still the British Empire, always led in these crucial meetings by Lord Balfour. So interestingly, Balfour is known for the declaration, but he was far more influential and impactful in these meetings. What does he say here? And this is relevant. It's so relevant. He's talking about the mandate for Palestine. It's taken 2 years. Remember, in 1920, they sent it to the Secretary General. 2 years later, it hasn't been approved. So he is concerned. And this is interesting because it shows that one of the reasons for the delay is that they were waiting for the support of the Americans, the United States. And he says here, now that the Americans agree, and you know what the Americans were worried about? Why they dragged their feet before they approved it? They were concerned that these powers would somehow drift away from their commitments to the Jews or drift away from other commitments. So the United States insisted that they had to give their assent, their approval, and eventually they did. And the other thing is mentioned here in this, which is very important, the Treaty of Sèvres. Because it was signed but not ratified, what Balfour says, it doesn't matter that it wasn't ratified because there's absolutely nothing relating to the mandates, relating to the rights that were given either to the Jews and the Arabs, that was changed later in the Treaty of Lausanne. So, he also says something so relevant today. He says, you know, there's a misconception here regarding mandates. They were not created by the League. They were created by the principal powers. The author is the principal powers, not the League. And he says that the role of the League is simply, we limited our powers. We could have conquered and kept, but we handed over these territories for a purpose. And the League has to administer these mandates for those purposes. You're not the author. We are. So don't you dare think about taking away from the rights of the Jews that are in the mandate. Stop dragging your feet. We want this done. How crucial was his intervention? What about the United Nations? The United Nations thinks that it is the creator of all of this. Even though Article 80 of the UN Charter says very clearly that all the rights that were given to any people before the signing of the UN Charter are to be honored and respected. So now, we're celebrating 100 years. 100 years since the decision was made, St. James Palace. Some of you may have seen this palace recently, because that's where King Charles was recognized as king. He hasn't been crowned, fully crowned, but he was there. And in that place, look at these are the 8 nations who approved on July 24th the mandate. Of course, Balfour played a key role. And here's on 2 days before the 24th, the 22nd, in a private meeting, the decision is made to approve the mandate. Then on July 24th, this is the turning point as far as a legal instrument is concerned. They're adopted. And the official approval, as far as I'm concerned, gave recognition to all of the terms of the mandate by all the nations that were part of the League of Nations. They have an obligation to do everything necessary to support the establishment of the national home. So the mandate for Palestine, we've already seen, you know, the draft in the document that was approved on the 24th, the recognition that I've talked about is there, the key article 2 is there, and then there's an article 15 in the document. And this article is so crucial. It must be noted. It must be memorized by everyone in Israel. Because it says that in Palestine, nothing should be allowed to discriminate in any way between the inhabitants on the grounds of race, religion, language, and no person shall be excluded from Palestine on the sole ground of religious belief, any part of Palestine. However, Article 25 that I showed you earlier was changed. The British tucked in this article before the mandate was approved, giving them the right to deal with the Palestine territories east of the Jordan River in a different way, giving them the authority to partition it. In my opinion, they didn't have the right to do that, but they went ahead. Now, it took me years to actually get a copy of the original signed document. And as a result of the labors and persistence of a very dear friend who encouraged me over the years so often, by the name, he's a Swiss man, by the name of Hans-Peter Buschi. And he's here tonight. Hans-Peter, could you just please stand for 1 second? Thank you. We were able to locate the document in the National Archives in London. We couldn't find it in Geneva. It was found. And I saw the name for the first time. You can find copies of the Mandate for Palestine all over the internet. You'll not find one that's signed. We found it. And look who signed it. William Rappard. Remember we talked about the Rappard family. An amazing Swiss diplomat. One of my heroes. He was at the time the director of the Mandate section. He remained the director and fought for Palestine for years as director. I've got the proceedings that I've read. The more I read, the more I admired him. And so you see his signature. So what's cool and interesting is that Rappard was the founder of the Graduate Institute of International Studies in Geneva, where I labored over 20 years to get this thesis completed, and where 3 of my 4 daughters were students. And it's a very, very good institution. And he was the founder with Paul Mantoux, who was an historian from France who played a key role at the peace conference. So, just a moment to show you the key articles of the 3 mandates. Bottom line, in Palestine, it's for the Jews. If you read the Mandate for Palestine, you'll note that you'll find 35 references to the Jews and a grand total, I think, of 2 or 3 references to the Arabs. Whereas in the other 2, it's all about the Arab inhabitants. So, something happens October 4 in Geneva. There's another meeting. This is another turning point in the history from a legal point of view. This is when the Council meets and approves a memorandum presented by the British relating to the partition of Palestine. I found the memorandum. And here's the decision on September 16. And in that decision, and it's important to know who the Council members were, because you'll see what happens after. There's another violation of Jewish rights, another betrayal of the Jewish people. So in this document, basically, in this memo adopted by the Council, it says, the following provisions of the mandate are no longer going to apply in the new Arab state. All the rights that have been given to the Jewish people in regard to Palestine, they're deleted for those territories. However, certain rights are to remain and not be in any way violated, including the rights in Article 15. No discrimination on basis of race or religion. The Jews have the same rights. They cannot be expelled from any territory. They can't be told that they don't belong anywhere in the territory. That was supposed to apply in the new Jordan area, in the new Arab state. A fortiori, obviously, if it was supposed to apply over there, it certainly should apply in the rest of what was Palestine. So, this memorandum closes with a commitment from the British. Please note what is underlined. And I argue, and will continue to argue, that that's relevant today. That the British will make sure that what is supposed to be protected on the east side will continue to be protected. It was never protected. The Jews never had any rights whatsoever. And the British didn't lift a finger. You know what we're trying to do today? We're trying to take away those rights from the Jewish people on the west side of the Jordan River, on the remnant of Palestine. So you see, Palestine, as it was designed, as it was referred to in the Mandate for Palestine, until this decision on September 16. So look at this, the result. The Arabs wanted independence, they wanted states in some parts of the Ottoman territories. Iraq, 185,000 square kilometers. Syria, 95,000. Now Jordan, also taken for the Arabs. What's left is 16,800 square kilometers for the Jews. Grand total, 340,000 square kilometers for the Arabs. 16,800 square kilometers for the Jews. That's less than 5% of the territories that were sought after. I mean, I don't have to be the best human rights lawyer to say to you there's something unfair here, when now they have so little left, resulting from the covenants and the promises and the pledges, so little left, and we want to take away more. So, I want to show you, I have actually an original map with me today. It's a map of the League of Nations, and it shows the area after the partition. And look at what it says. I made it a little bigger. Within Palestine, the League has made a decision recognizing a separate Arab government in Palestine. My conclusion, which I think is very difficult to contradict, is that an Arab state, a significant Arab state covering 75% of Palestine, has already been created and established in Palestine. Don't take my word for it. Just read what the League says. And now we want to take more from what's left. Treaty of Lausanne follows, and this treaty confirms everything that happened before. It's the end of the occupation. It's a treaty of peace with the Turks. I don't have time to go into the 1939 white paper, but this is the British did some marvelous things. It's the good, the bad, and the ugly. Here they turn really ugly. They actually introduce a law through the MacDonald white paper in May 39, whereby Palestine is no longer going to be a Jewish state. It's going to be a state with an Arab majority, and the immigration of the Jews is limited, the right to purchase things is limited. It's outrageous. It's a breach of the most fundamental aspects of the mandate for Palestine. They could get away with it because the Permanent Mandate Commission stopped functioning. That's when the League started to fall apart. UN Charter, just to show you before the final resolution of the League, where they say we must continue to administer those lands for the well-being and development of the peoples concerned in accordance with the obligations contained in the mandates. The mandate for Palestine is relevant, and the people concerned relating to that land surely is the Jewish people. Mentioned Article 80 earlier, clearly mentions that the rights are supposed to be protected. UN partition resolution, never forget. General Assembly resolutions, according to the Charter, are not binding. This was a mere recommendation. Had it been accepted by Jews and Arabs, it could have been part of a treaty, then it would have been a source of rights and obligations. It wasn't. Irrelevant. And yet, how many documents do I see referring to this resolution as if it was law? Nonsense. The birth of Israel, they decide, at long last, May 14, as the mandate ends, to issue this declaration of a state. Making reference, you'll note, to the mandate. Mandate is mentioned in the declaration. But at that time, we all knew that they were going to be attacked. So the extent to which they reach out and try to take territory is impeded and obstructed. And you see how there's reference to the Balfour Declaration in that. So there's a war of independence. They fight with the Arabs from all over the place. But as far as the core area that are pertinent to us, here's something outrageous. Resolution after resolution makes reference to the Green Line. As if the Green Line was a sacred thing in law. What's the Green Line? It's the armistice line between Israel and Transjordan, signed in April of 1949. And if you look at Article 2, you don't have to go to law school to understand what that says. It's the line where we stop fighting. It's not meant to be the source of rights and obligations, sovereignty rights and obligations at all. They agree to that. You'll note in Article 3 of that agreement that the parties agree not to attack each other anymore. No warlike stuff anymore. No hostile acts anymore. Guess what they did, the Jordanians, in 1967? They attack Israel. And they lose. They lose the territory. They breach a core article of their armistice agreement. And now, in some kind of gymnastic, acrobatic thing, we're saying this Green Line, which was merely an armistice line, is to be the line that counts when we discuss peace with Palestinians. The International Court of Justice made an advisory opinion which makes it very clear that even though the League of Nations was dissolved, even though some of the mandate's term couldn't be implemented anymore, the raison d'être, the key objects of each mandate are still relevant. It's funny, the same court in 2004 dealing with the fence case forgot all of that. When it comes to Israel, they have one set of rules. When it came to Southwest Africa, they have a whole bunch of different ones. So to conclude, just we know what happened in 1967. Never forget the terms of Article 51 of the UN Charter, which say very clearly that you cannot attack another state. It's prohibited by the Charter. Each state has a right to defend itself, except for Israel. Resolution 242. If I was the lawyer arguing the case about that resolution right now, I would say simply this. Yes, Israel contemplated withdrawing from some territories, provided that there was no more belligerency, that the neighbors weren't trying to destroy it anymore. So as a lawyer, I would turn to the parties and say, sorry, you certainly not honored that. Everybody wants to destroy, whether it's Hamas or... Hamas is just a name. It's Arabs in a part of that area. They're Arabs. They want to destroy Israel. So does Hezbollah. So does, so many particular terrorist groups. The conditions are not there which would require Israel to do anything about that resolution. Somebody else asked me, does Israel have the right to annex all those territories? It hasn't. It annexed Jerusalem, it annexed the Golan Heights. Could it legally annex everything else right now? My answer is, of course. The rights were given. And people say, but you can't get sovereignty over a territory by conquest of the land of another. And I say that's a good principle. I agree with it. That's the law. Except it wasn't the land of another. I spent the last hour telling you it's the land that was granted to the Jewish people by those who had the power of disposition. Annexation of Jerusalem took place. Again, that green line. Look at what happens to Jerusalem if we use the green line. The entirety of the old city becomes part of the Palestinian state. Can you imagine? The old city was Jerusalem for 19 centuries. There was no Jerusalem outside the walls. It is Jerusalem. And what people do, and I present this to parliamentarians, to leaders around the world. I said, do you know what you're doing? You're singing from a songbook that says the green line. But do you know what it does to Jerusalem? It takes the heart and soul of Zion. If you're a Zionist and you take Zion out, what's left? Not much. And yet people don't understand. Again, the green line is nothing sacred. It was an armistice line in a document that was violated by those who signed it. And in my view, Israel is not bound. Israel is interested politically in solutions. And you have to understand that what I present to you, the bottom line is that there's a false narrative. Israel has rights. They were given in international law. So you don't go into a negotiating room and say, you thieves and you usurpers. You're there as a right. And what the state of Israel chooses to do with those rights is up to Israel. But it belongs to them. Thank you.
We will give you the opportunity to ask some questions for 15 minutes, and in French or English as you want. And this is a micro here. Can you please hand your hands if you have a question to Dr. Gauthier?
Thank you, Jacques. According to my experience, outside Israel, many are fighting for these rights. But when I speak to Israelis, even people from the government, I have not the impression that they know what you told this evening. Recently, somebody from the inner ministry told me, I explained what I'm doing here, and he said, oh, it's good for your soul, you do it, but he doesn't feel like fighting with these rights. What is wrong with Israel that they do not refer to the rights? They do not tell the nations 100 years ago, you gave us these rights. You never hear it. That's a problem.
Okay.
Thank you.
Your question is a good question. I'm delighted to report that over the last 16 years, I've interacted continually with the representatives of the government of Israel, and their position now is totally different than it was many years ago. I did meet with a very senior counsel at one point over 10 years ago, and in the offices of the foreign ministry, he told me, Dr. Gauthier, we're so impressed with your work. I've been reading it, and it's so wonderful. And he couldn't stop praising me. So I started to feel good. And then he went on, he said, but your work is irrelevant. It's too late. The Palestinian narrative is carved in stone in the minds and hearts of so many nations, so many leaders around the world. It's very nice what you're doing, but you're too late. And I looked at him before walking out of the boardroom and said, I'm presenting what I believe is the truth. It's taken me years to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And there's nothing in what I present, not a component, which is not the truth. It is light that dispels darkness. I believe truth is always relevant, always. And even if it's not a collectivity of people in a nation that accepts the truth and acts accordingly, individuals can make a difference. That's my experience in life. It's getting a little longer in my life now. And I see people who make a difference once they understand the truth. So I've now, I won't say this. I know that I believe the brother of the president is with us today. And yes, so nice to meet you. Can you believe that as an example of the changing positions? I was involved in making a presentation virtually in San Remo earlier this year. And it was an important event. The person who gave the opening remarks was the president of Israel. He only spoke for 4 minutes. For the first 2 minutes, I had tears in my eyes. He summarized the importance of the San Remo conference. 2 minutes. Ask me to do that in 2 minutes. 25 minutes later, you'll still be hearing a good answer. 2 minutes. He is so articulate, and it was coming from his soul. The next 2 minutes, he says, and then there are people who've made such a difference for the creation of the state of Israel and our legal rights. He referred to Chaim Weizmann. And I went, yay, I know, he's my friend. I read so much for so many years, like I'm intimate with Weizmann. And then the other is Jacques Gauthier. I almost fell out of my chair. And he said, I have a copy of his thesis on my desk, and I keep it there all the time because I like to refer to it. So my friend, Hans-Peter, that's the head of state. So I know, I could tell you, when I organized the conference at the King David in Jerusalem in 2012, and I invited many government officials, almost no one came. In 2017, 3 departments of Israel, Justice, Strategic Studies, and Religious Affairs, together organized the conference with Jacques Gauthier as the key speaker. And they turned away people because it was so coveted by people in Israel. So it's changing. And just last comment, what about the people of Israel? Never mind the leaders. Last year, there was an article that was about 25 pages long in Israel Hayom. I think it's the largest circulation in Israel. And with a whole page from the Prime Minister, it was Bibi then, it'll be Bibi again soon, I think, and the President, Livni at the time, and others, all about San Remo. An interview of Jacques Gauthier that went on for 7 pages. So that's in Hebrew, and that's for the people. So it's taken a while. But what's the old saying about Rome being built in not a day? So I'm very encouraged. I think we're the day when Israel, and I can tell you that the Prime Legal Counsel of Israel has approached me, and we've met Tal Becker. And he says, when I go here and there in various capitals of the world, guess what I talk about? I talk about San Remo. So it's taken a while, but we're making progress.
Thank you. I wanted to know, why have you chosen to work on the Jewish rights in particular? Like, what led you to this point?
It's not the first time I'm asked that question. And it's a good question. It's a short question. The answer is long. But in essence, I should say I was looking for a long time, I was looking for a meaningful subject for my thesis. I did not want to do the PhD just to get the doctorate. I was looking for a good cause, and it took a while, but I visited Jerusalem. I met Israelis, I met Palestinians, and it just became obvious to me that there was something to be researched there. And I picked up about 15, 20 articles and books on the issue of sovereignty, every single one of them had a different conclusion and a different way to get to the conclusion. And I said, something's wrong here. I want to get to the bottom of this. And I wish I had realized that it was be a huge undertaking. But the other part of it is just, I am a person of faith. I'm not Jewish. I just had the sense that, how does one say that in a few words? I felt it was a calling for me. I'd pursued so many other causes, and that this is something I had to do for the rest of my life. And that's why I'm here today. En français, si vous voulez.
So my question is, I'm representing the Union of the Jewish Students in Geneva, and a lot of students come to me and ask me, like in the university or in the common life, if someone is coming to argument on this conflict, Palestine and Israel, you did an impressive presentation, thank you. But we can't bring all these things like in a quick situation. If we just saw someone and there is a little debate, is there like a short answer that we can give to people like that just come to debate, 2 minutes? Because we can't bring all this on the table. So is there an answer that we can give to people, students, to us, that I can teach to them, maybe if there is an argumentation, so they have a power to fight with this?
The shortest answer I could give you is that the pathway to peace is through the recognition of what is true historically. The pathway to peace is pursuing justice not just for the Palestinians, but for the Jewish people as well. And until they're prepared and ready to listen, and I again say that presenting all of this, that's not a solution. It is a pathway to a solution. The other thing I have to say, and that's the frustrating part for me, I wish I could tell you that you can ignore the details of my presentation, but you can't. If I could accomplish this tonight, I would say, boom, all of you are going to go wake up tomorrow morning and it's all there in your head and hearts. Because these are the truthful, that's the narrative that needs to be presented to counter all the false narratives. And right now, people of goodwill, and may I be allowed, Ambassador, to say this, it's because of what I do, I have a lot of Jewish friends. And I worry about my Canadian Jewish friends, my American Jewish friends, others in different parts of the world, because their concern is, in a sense, they want peace. They want peace where they are. And if you activate this too much, it results not in less anti-Semitism, but more anti-Semitism. That's regrettable. But ultimately, it's necessary for the world to know that what I present is the truth. And then we deal with it. It's not the end, it's the beginning. There's a scripture in the Zechariah, in the Hebrew Bible, which says, speak words that lead to righteous judgments and will lead to peace. In other words, if all you say is horrible things about every aspect of the Jewish presence, how can the world, I mean, I'm a counsel to governments. You know, can you imagine, I was given the Legion of Honor of France after speaking like this around the world? What does that suggest to you? You know, there are people under the surface, behind the scenes, who want to be fair. And you never know when look at the miracle of the Abraham Accords. Okay, this is not theory. This is what happened. It's true. So again, we're dealing with the Holy Land, and the issues are complex and numerous. But my final comment: truth is always relevant. If it's very, very dark and you light a little match, guess what happens? Light will dispel darkness. That's my conviction.
One last question.
Okay, thank you for being so attentive. Is there a last question? Yes.
Merci pour votre évidemment excellente conférence. C'est pas vraiment une question. Je voulais profiter du lieu qui est symbolique, de la présence du frère du président Herzog et du fait qu'on fait qu'on travaille maintenant évidemment à faire un nouveau gouvernement. Il manque à Israël un département, un ministère de la Hasbara. Vraiment la communication du monde, et ça reflète de ce que vous venez de dire et ce que Hans-Peter Buschia vient de dire. Et au niveau, c'est surtout au niveau francophone. Je sais qu'au niveau anglais c'est la même chose, mais au niveau francophone c'est épouvantable comme la presse dépeint Israël. Et je pense qu'en effet Israël, et c'est ce qui manque maintenant, ne se rend pas compte du tout du fait qu'on doit voilà, vraiment publier la vérité, comme vous dites. Mais il manque un ministère qui a des sous pour faire ça. Les ambassades ne peuvent pas faire tout ça. Il manque vraiment un ministère de la Hasbara. Voilà.
Je ne vais pas prendre la parole pour le gouvernement israélien, mais je vais vous dire que moi, mon témoignage, c'est qu'il y a d'énormes progrès concernant ce que j'essaie de présenter. Ça me prendrait encore 1 heure qu'on n'a pas ce soir pour vous dire tous les exemples. Une petite, je vais dire ça, j'étais à Jérusalem au mois de mai et j'ai visité cet immense immeuble, the National Library of Israel, qui va être complété prochainement. C'est magnifique. Il n'y a pas un immeuble, un endroit au monde où il y a plus de livres. Et comme j'étais là officiellement avec d'autres, j'ai donné une copie de ma thèse aux représentants, et 2 semaines plus tard, on m'a écrit pour me dire que ma thèse était maintenant un document officiel. My thesis is now an official document of the National Library of Israel, and one of the side effects of that, which is really interesting, is that you can access it digitally. You don't have to buy it. So every official document, so you know, the truth shall come out of Zion. So that somebody said that, but I read that somewhere. And it's now in the National Library. So, yes. Merci.
So thank you, Dr. Jacques Gauthier, for this masterful presentation. You have unveiled for us the complexity of international law. But I think we have to maybe work together to make something very accessible, not with 1,300 pages. So, to give us the opportunity to reflect of this presentation, we listen to a medley of traditional Israeli melodies for voice, violin, and piano, performed by Sophie Ellen Frank, Paul Hess and Natacha Catusse. And Sophie Ellen Frank is an opera singer with an international career. Together with Paul Hess, She is a co-founder of the Piccolo Opera, which brings the love of opera to children. Please.
עוד לא בא מתקבר, עוד לא מצאתי מים באמצע המדבר, עוד לא גיליתי פרח, עוד לא גיליתי איך, תוביל אותי הדרך ולאן אני הולך. עוד לא מצאתי די, הרוח והשמש על פניי. עוד לא אמרתי די, ואם לא עכשיו, מתי? באלה הידיים עוד לא ממיתי כבר, עוד לא מצאתי מים באמצע המדבר, עוד לא גיליתי פרח, עוד לא גיליתי איך, תוביל לדרך או לאן אני הולך. עוד לא אהבתי די, הרוח והשמש על פניי. עוד לא אמרתי די, ואם לא עכשיו, מתי? ליבי חוסנה ואנה תתעלם אלך עמדה ליבי חוסנה ואנה תתעלם אלך עמדה ליבי חוסנה ואנה תתעלם אלך עמדה ליבי חוסנה ואנה תתעלם hamda libi usana ve hamna titalim ile hamda libi usana ve hamna titalim. ושפתם מים בששון ממעני הישוע, שפתם מים בששון ממעני הישוע, מים 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 הם מים בששון, מים 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 היי 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 מים 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 בששון, מים 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 בששון. ארצה עלינו כבר הרשנו וגם זרענו, כבר הרשנו וגם זרענו, אבל עוד לא קצרנו, אבל עוד לא קצרנו, אבל עוד לא קצרנו, אבל עוד לא קצרנו.
Bravo et merci. Thank you very much. Before closing the event, I would like to give the floor to Joël Herzog, the president of the Geneva section of Swiss Israel. This was not foreseen in the program, but we will give him the opportunity to speak for a short speech. Dear Joël, the microphone is yours.
Good evening, Your Excellency Ambassador, dear Meirav, Dr. Jacques Gauthier, thank you for a brilliant and most fascinating presentation. We learned a lot. Dr. Lafitte, Richard Pittet, and all of you, dear friends. Thank you very much to the organizers, our section of Swiss Israel Association is glad to have joined in this organization, but the burden it's Richard Pittet and his friends who bore. Thank you for those who sponsored and helped this event, and thank you for this brilliant presentation. It is quite amazing that 100 years after these events, 125 years after Herzl presented himself in Basel. We were there a few months ago to celebrate it. 75 years for the State of Israel in the next few months, that the rights of the Jewish people to have their state, to have their land, the only Jewish state in the world, is still in question by certain, is still a subject of debate, is still a matter that we have to defend. We would have thought that this is something that is in the nature of the world, and we don't need to defend it and explain it. And we do need people, as you did, to present and remind the history, because the young generation, even in Israel, doesn't know the history. They never learned it. They look in this telephone, and that's what they look. They don't read books. This is too long. It's 300 pages. Who's going to open it? And they don't know anything. And even we, who studied, and I made a few speeches on San Remo. We made a conference in the Geneva University a few years ago about all these events and commemorations. I learned a lot of things I didn't know. And thank you for that. We still have a problem that some good thinkers in the West, the Palestinian people, are still challenging the right of the Jewish people to its nation state, a Jewish and democratic state. And this is the core of the problem. All the rest is superfluous. Talking about UNRWA, talking about refugees, it's all stories. It's excuses. The core of the problem is that until today, since 100 years, 125 years, the Palestinian people have not recognized that they want to live next to us. They want to live instead of us. This is the core of the whole problem. I was in Dubai exactly a year ago, this November, with Baron Eric de Rothschild and Leah Pizar, the sister of Anthony Blinken. We visited Expo, and the Emirati protocol asked us which stands we wish to visit. So we gave a list of stands, and there was with us the ex-vice president of the French Senate. She said, "Can we visit the Palestinians?" We said, "Yes, we would like to visit the Palestinian stand." The answer of the Emirati protocol was they were shocked that the Palestinians refuse that I, Baron de Rothschild, and Leah Pizar go and visit their stand. And the reason was very simple. That's one of the reasons we asked to go. They had a big map between the sea and the river as Palestine, and they were afraid that we will come, the three of us, Baron Eric de Rothschild, Joël Herzog, and Leah Pizar, and take a photo next to that presentation. And they didn't want it, so they refused us. But this shows that this is the core of the problem. This is the matter. All the rest is excuses. The second problem, which I remember and is important, is that the education which is given to generations of Palestinian children is an education of hate, of adoration of death and not life, and of adoration of terrorism. On that basis, you cannot create peace or coexistence. And therefore, as long as this, which is financed by the Europeans, by the Swiss, they are giving the money for these books, are not stopped, we will not have a common basis to really continue. And even if we start today, it will take 15 or 20 years until we will change the narrative. In the Emirates, the narrative changed, the books changed. In the Emirates now, with Aladdin Project, we are teaching the Shoah in the schools. It's part of the curriculum. In Saudi Arabia, the books changed. The teachers are still Palestinians, so I don't know what they say, but the books changed. But in Palestine, no. Not even in the Palestinian schools in Israel. And this is the fault of our government. So we have a decision. You're right, saying that the right is for the whole land. Yes, we have to protect the rights of minorities. We don't want too many minorities. We want a Jewish state. It means a majority of Jews, 80%, 75%. This is our decision. It's not a question of international law. It's a sovereign question of the Jewish people, of the Israelis, what type of state they want. A mixture of a state or a Jewish state. That's our question. Where do we want to put the line? But the rights are stated by you. You're right. And finally, I would like to say that there is this definition of anti-Semitism by IRA, which amongst others states that not recognizing our right as a Jews for a national state is a form of anti-Semitism. It is today approved by the Swiss Confederation, but we need to bring it into practice in every canton, in every sports club, in every education system, in order to make it a reality. And this is one of the challenges we have. So really, you opened our eyes. You showed us things which should have been evident today, but we still have to fight for them. I thank you for that. And I thank all of you for the help and the support you are giving Israel. And thank you very much. And in anticipation, because we are coming to the end of November, Happy New Year also. Thank you.
Thank you, Joël, for this motivation speech. So we have come to the end of our conference, and we hope that you have received some clarification and answers, but we also hope that it will raise questions and why not challenges. I would first like to thank the Beau Rivage Hotel for its welcome and presence of Mr. Herr, maybe there. No, it's not. This is the director of the Beau Rivage. And I would like to thank all of our sponsors and partners, the Permanent Mission of Israel, to the UN, the Swiss Israel Association, the European Coalition for Israel, Esther Foundation, UN Watch. Thanks to all for sponsoring and helping to organize this event. And thanks to Jean-François and Nathalie Collet and Diane Patry, our generous sponsor, without whom this project would not have been possible. Thank you all to the dedicated team of Gesher Ha'haim, to my wife and my children, who carry me the effort of this project that we put in place. Thank you to Dr. Jacques Gauthier and to Rani, his wife, and also to Adriella, who accompanied us through this conference. Thank you also to Mr. William Kerapar and those accompanying him for honoring us with your presence. We're here. We invite you to spend some time over our friendly drink, and I am sure that Dr. Gauthier will be happy to answer your question again. And we are also at your disposal if you wish more about our association. And I will wish you a pleasant evening. Thank you very much for coming.